the day I came back to life, I made myself one promise. I would not cry, not this time. Because the last time I stood in that room, surrounded by people who were supposed to love me, I cried so hard I could barely breathe. I begged, I explained. I stretched out my hands and showed them everything I had sacrificed. And do you know what they did? They laughed. He laughed, the man I had loved for 6 years. The man I had quietly funded through law school while wearing the same 2 pairs of shoes for 3 winters. He stood at the head of that banquet table, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "She's always been poor. It's honestly embarrassing that she thought she belonged here." And the room agreed, every glass raised, every smile sharp. I died that night, not metaphorically. I mean, I closed my eyes in that parking lot, in the cold, with nothing. And I did not wake up in a hospital. I woke up 3 years earlier, same face, same hands, but something behind my eyes had changed completely. And the first thing I did when I sat up in that bed was smile, because I knew something none of them knew yet. I knew exactly who I really was, and I knew exactly what was coming for every single one of them. The morning I woke up 3 years in the past, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from memory. I remembered everything, every meal I skipped so he could eat well, every shift I picked up at the restaurant while he studied under warm lights. Every time his mother looked at me like I was something she had accidentally stepped on. And I smiled anyway, because I thought love was supposed to cost something. I was 23 again, living in my tiny studio apartment with a broken heater and a scholarship I was barely holding on to. And somewhere across the city, Daniel Kwan was sitting in his comfort, completely unaware that the woman he would one day destroy in front of 50 people had just opened her eyes with 3 years of pain burned into her chest like a brand. I sat up slowly, looked around the room. Same cracked ceiling, same secondhand desk, same envelope on the counter. I knew exactly what was inside it before I even touched it. An invitation to his family's annual winter gala. His mother had sent it personally, which I had once taken as a sign of acceptance. I knew better now that gala was where it started. Not the ending, the starting. That was the night Daniel's mother first planted the seed that I was not good enough. That was the night she whispered something to Daniel's cousin, and his cousin whispered it to 3 others. And suddenly the way people looked at me across the room shifted by exactly 3 degrees. Colder, more calculating. I had been too in love to notice it then, but now I noticed everything. I put the invitation down and did something the old me never would have done. I picked up my phone and called my grandmother, Nai, who I had spent years keeping at a distance because Daniel said she was too traditional and made him uncomfortable. My grandmother, who had called me every Sunday for 2 years, and I had let it go to voicemail because I was too busy building a life inside someone else's world. She answered on the second ring. "May," she said, and just the sound of my name in her voice broke something open in me. "Nai," I said quietly. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." A pause. Then, "You finally remember." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" She was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was not the soft, patient voice of an old woman missing her granddaughter. It was something older, steadier, like a door being unlocked that had been sealed for a very long time. "Your mother made me promise not to tell you until you were ready," she said. "I think you are ready now." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went pale. Because here is what I had always believed about myself, that I was nobody, a scholarship girl with a dead mother, a missing father, and nothing to her name but stubbornness and student debt. That was the story I had lived inside. That was the story Daniel used against me in front of everyone that night at the banquet. She's always been poor. It's honestly embarrassing. And the reason the room laughed was because they all believed it too. But Nai's voice in that moment told me something that made my entire past rearrange itself like puzzle pieces snapping together after years of being scattered. I had never been who they thought I was, and neither was my mother. "Tell me everything," I whispered. She took a slow breath, and then she said a name. A name I recognized, a name that was on buildings, on foundations, on the kind of doors that people like Daniel Kwan spent their whole lives trying to get behind. My last name? My real last name. The name my grandmother said was Shen. Not just any Shen, Wei Shen, the founder of Shen Capital, one of the oldest private investment firms on the East Coast. A name that didn't show up in gossip columns because it didn't need to. The kind of wealth that never announced itself. The kind that simply existed, quietly and permanently, like bedrock under a city. My grandfather, my mother had run away at 22, fell in love with a man her father didn't approve of, packed one bag, and walked out of a life most people would never even get to glimpse. She raised me alone after my father left. She worked double shifts and sang to me in Mandarin and never once told me where she came from. And then she died, and I was left with nothing. Except apparently, I was left with everything. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time after Nai hung up. She had said the lawyers would contact me, that my grandfather had been looking for me for years, that there were documents, a trust, a number that she refused to say out loud because she said I needed to be sitting down somewhere safe when I heard it. I was already sitting, but I didn't feel safe. I felt like a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, finally understanding that what she thought was a fall had actually been a flight all along. But here's what the old me would have done with this information. She would have called Daniel immediately, rushed to tell him, hoped it would finally make him look at her differently, hoped it would fix something that was never actually broken in her, only broken in him. I did not do that. Instead, I did something small, something precise. I called the restaurant where I worked and quit. Politely, professionally, without drama. Then I called the financial aid office at my university and scheduled a private meeting for the following morning. Then I opened my laptop and began writing an email. Not to Daniel, not to his family, but to Wei Shen's legal team, whose contact information Nai had already sent over. The subject line was 3 words, I am ready. I hit send and felt something shift in my chest, like a key turning. And then, because I still had a role to play for now, I picked up that gala invitation, slid it back into its envelope, and wrote a single line on a piece of paper that I tucked inside. I'll be there, May. I was going to that gala, not as the girl who showed up grateful and nervous, smoothing her discount dress and hoping nobody noticed. I was going to show up exactly as I was, quiet, observant, and already 3 moves ahead. I wanted to watch Daniel in his natural environment one more time. I wanted to see who he really was when he thought I was still nobody. Because in my last life, I had been so consumed by loving him that I missed all the signs, the way his eyes moved around a room calculating status, the way he touched my hand in private and barely acknowledged me in public, the way his mother always made sure to ask me, sweetly, dangerously, and how is the restaurant job going, May? In front of exactly the right people. They had been performing for an audience the entire time. Now it was my turn. What I did not expect, what even I, with all my memories, could not have predicted, was what I overheard 3 nights before the gala. I had gone to return a book to Daniel's apartment. He didn't know I was coming. The door was slightly open, and his voice carried clearly into the hallway, low and deliberate, the voice he used when he thought no one important was listening. She doesn't know anything, he said. Just keep her close until after the merger. Once the Shen deal is signed, we won't need her anymore. My hand froze on the door. The Shen deal, my family's name, in his mouth, like he had been holding it there for a long time. He already knew. I did not push that door open. I stood in that hallway, back flat against the wall, heart hammering so loud I was afraid he would hear it. And I listened, because the old May would have burst through that door crying, would have demanded an explanation, would have handed him the exact reaction he had probably already planned for. I was not her anymore. She's been kept in the dark her whole life, Daniel continued, his voice smooth and unhurried. Her grandmother is the only connection, and the old woman thinks May just needs time. She doesn't suspect anything. A second voice, male, someone I didn't recognize yet, and the grandfather? Wei Shen actually agreed to meet her next month. But by then, the preliminary contracts will already be signed. My father's firm gets the partnership. Shen Capital gets a trustworthy local liaison, which is us. and May gets whatever emotional reunion she was apparently waiting her whole life for. A pause, then, quieter. She's the key that opens the door. That's all she ever was. That's all she ever was. 6 years. 6 years of loving him. 6 years of working double shifts and skipping vacations and believing that one day he would look at me the way I deserved to be looked at. And I had been a business strategy, a human key, a girl shaped perfectly by poverty and longing into exactly the tool they needed. I walked away from that door without making a sound, but my mind was already moving fast and cold, assembling everything, every memory from my past life, every moment that hadn't made sense, clicking into place like tumblers in a lock. The first time Daniel approached me at university, I had thought it was accidental. A coffee shop, his smile, his questions, how he had seemed so genuinely interested in my background, my family, where I came from. I had told him everything, every sad, orphaned detail of my life. I thought he was falling for me. He was taking notes. Someone had tipped him off. Someone knew that Wei Shen's long-lost granddaughter was somewhere in the city, living under a hidden name, unaware of her inheritance. And Daniel, calculated, patient, lethal in his politeness, had found me first. The relationship was never love. It was surveillance dressed in romance. But here was the twist that even Daniel didn't see coming. I called Nai that same night and told her everything I had heard. Every word, and when I finished, she was quiet for exactly 4 seconds before she said something that stopped my breath completely. "I know," she said. "I've known for 8 months." "What?" "The Kwan family approached your grandfather's lawyers last year. They proposed the partnership themselves. They positioned it as a goodwill gesture. Their firm supporting the Shen legacy." Her voice was steady, precise, nothing like the soft grandmother voice I was used to. "Your grandfather is not a foolish man, May." He recognized the angle immediately. He said nothing and waited. Waited for what? For you to call me. My legs went weak. I sat down on the floor of my apartment right there, back against the wall, phone pressed to my ear. "You mean, grandfather already knows about Daniel? He knows everything." "He has known. The question was whether you would figure it out yourself. Or whether you would arrive at that gala still believing you were in love with a man who manufactured your entire relationship from the beginning." I closed my eyes, and then I understood the full shape of it. My grandfather hadn't been passively waiting for a reunion. He had been watching, testing, letting the Kwan family believe their plan was working, while quietly building a wall around me that they couldn't see. I was never unprotected. I had been watched over by someone I hadn't even met yet. And Daniel was walking into a gala in 4 days believing he held all the cards, when every single card in the deck already belonged to us. He built a 6-year trap and thought he was the hunter. Part 4 is where he finds out he was never the one holding the cage. The night of the gala, I wore white, not because I was innocent, because I wanted them to remember exactly what I looked like when everything fell apart for them. White is the color that stays in people's memory. White is the color you see clearly even when the room is spinning. I arrived alone, no Daniel beside me, no nervous smile rehearsed in the mirror. I had told him I would meet him there, and he had sounded pleased about that, relaxed even, because a girl who arrives alone at a room full of strangers is easier to control. She needs you more. She stays closer. That was his calculation. He forgot that I had already lived this night once. The Kwan family's winter gala was held at the Meridian Grand, 42nd floor, floor-to-ceiling glass, the kind of room that made ordinary people feel small on purpose. Chandeliers like frozen waterfalls, women in gowns that cost more than my old monthly rent, men in suits moving through the crowd like they owned not just the room, but the air inside it. I moved through it all like I was born there, because I was beginning to understand. I actually was. Daniel found me within minutes. His eyes swept over my dress, my posture, something flickering behind his expression that he covered quickly with a smile. "You look different," he said. "I feel different," I said simply. He laughed it off and took my arm, steering me toward his family's table. His mother, Victoria Kwan, was already seated, diamonds at her throat, a glass of champagne held with 2 fingers, eyes that missed nothing and forgave nothing. She looked at me the way she always did, like I was a smudge on an otherwise clean surface. "May," she said warmly, dangerously, "so glad you could make it." Still working at the restaurant? There it was, right on schedule. The little needle she always slipped in early, making sure everyone within earshot understood the hierarchy before the night even began. In my last life, I had looked down at my hands and murmured something quiet and ashamed. This time, I smiled at her with all my teeth. "I actually resigned recently," I said. "I've been focused on some family matters." Something moved behind her eyes. Family matters? My grandfather's legal team has been keeping me quite busy. The word grandfather landed like a stone dropped into still water. I watched the ripples move across Victoria Kwan's face in real time. Confusion first, then a rapid recalculation, then something very close to fear, smoothed over almost instantly by a society smile that didn't reach her eyes anymore. Daniel's hand tightened on my arm. I let him hold it. For now. The dinner proceeded. Courses arrived and disappeared. Conversation moved around the table like a careful game, everyone performing for everyone else. And I sat quietly, eating, listening, watching Daniel's father across the table make jokes that weren't funny and laugh at them himself. Then the moment came, the moment I remembered. Daniel stood up, just like before, glass raised, eyes moving around the table with that particular confidence of a man who has never once doubted his own reflection. "I want to say something," he announced, loud enough for the neighboring tables to turn. "About May, in my last life, what followed had destroyed me." He had looked down at me with something performative and cruel dressed up as honesty. Talked about my background, my poverty, my place in a room like this. Let the laughter rise and fill the space, while I sat there breaking apart in slow motion. Not tonight, because before the next word left his mouth, the elevator at the far end of the room opened, and an old man walked in. Straight-backed, unhurried, flanked by two associates in dark suits. The room didn't erupt. It stilled. The way a room stills when something with real gravity enters it. Conversations dropped. Heads turned. Victoria Kwan's champagne glass stopped halfway to her lips. Daniel's voice faltered mid-breath. The old man walked directly toward our table. He did not look at Daniel. He did not look at Victoria. He looked only at me. And when our eyes met, something ancient and certain passed between us. He stopped beside my chair, placed one hand gently on my shoulder, and said clearly, into the silence of the entire room, "My granddaughter, I am sorry it took me so long to find you." The sound that moved through that room was not applause. It was the sound of 50 people simultaneously realizing they had completely misread every single thing about who I was. Daniel's face had gone the color of old paper. And I finally let myself smile. The room knows the truth now, but what Daniel doesn't know yet is that the night isn't even close to part 5. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Victoria Kwan stood up. She moved fast for a woman in heels, rounding the table with her smile already reconstructed, hand extended toward my grandfather like she was greeting an old friend, instead of a man whose granddaughter she had spent years quietly humiliating. "Mr. Shen," she said, warm and practiced. "What a wonderful surprise! We had no idea May was your—" "Yes, you did." His voice was not loud, it didn't need to be. It carried the way the voices of people with real power always carry, without effort, without performance, cutting clean through everything around it. Victoria's hand stayed extended in the air for one terrible second before she lowered it. My grandfather pulled out the chair beside me and sat down. His lawyers remained standing, flanking the table like parentheses around a sentence everyone was now desperate to finish reading. Daniel had not moved, had not spoken. He was still standing with his glass raised, and nowhere to put it, frozen in the posture of a man whose entire script had just been pulled out from under him mid-sentence. "Sit down, Mr. Kwan," my grandfather said. Daniel sat. "I want to discuss the partnership proposal your family submitted to my legal team last year." My grandfather folded his hands on the table, unhurried, precise, specifically. the portion of the proposal that outlines using my granddaughter's emotional circumstances as a point of leverage for contract negotiation. The neighboring tables had stopped pretending not to listen. Daniel's father, the great booming Harrison Kwan, who had laughed too loudly all evening, had gone completely still. His face was doing something complicated and ugly. That proposal, my grandfather continued, was declined. As of this morning, Shen Capital has also formally withdrawn from all preliminary discussions with Kwan and Associates. Permanently, Harrison Kwan's mouth opened, nothing came out. Furthermore, my grandfather reached into his jacket and placed a single folded document on the table. My lawyers have flagged several irregularities in the Kwan firm's recent filings. Irregularities that have been forwarded to the appropriate regulatory bodies. I imagine you'll be hearing from them early next week. The table had become a very quiet disaster. But I wasn't finished. I had waited 3 years, 2 lives, for this moment, and I had not come to this gala just to watch my grandfather dismantle them. I had come to say something myself. I stood up. Daniel finally looked at me, really looked at me. And I saw it. The thing underneath all the calculation and performance and careful cruelty. I saw that he understood, completely and too late, exactly what he had thrown away and exactly what he had never actually possessed. 6 years ago, I said, keeping my voice steady and quiet. I loved you so honestly, it embarrassed me. I worked nights so you could study. I made myself smaller so you could feel larger. I told myself that was what love looked like. The room was a held breath. Then you stood in a room full of people and used my poverty like a punchline. I let that sit for exactly 1 second. What you didn't know was that you were mocking the granddaughter of Wei Shen in front of witnesses. But honestly, that's the least interesting part of your mistake. Daniel's jaw was tight. His eyes were bright with something desperate. The most interesting part, I said, is that even if I had been exactly who you thought I was, a broke, ordinary girl with nothing, what you did was still unforgivable. The money was never the point. I was a person, and you never once saw that. I picked up my glass. I hope the merger you gambled 6 years of my life on was worth it. I set the glass down, turned to my grandfather, and for the first time since I woke up 3 years in the past with fire in my chest and nothing but determination in my hands, I felt something loosen inside me. Not anger, not triumph, peace. My grandfather offered me his arm and I took it. We walked out of that room together, through the silence, through the stairs, through the wreckage of everything they had built on top of a lie about who I was. Behind me, I heard Victoria Kwan begin to say something. And then I heard absolutely nothing, because the elevator doors closed and I was done listening to that family forever. Outside, the city was cold and bright and indifferent in the way cities always are, unbothered by the small catastrophes of arrogant people. My grandfather looked at me. Your mother, he said quietly, would have been proud. I didn't cry. I had promised myself I wouldn't. But I held his arm a little tighter, and I thought, let them keep the room. I have something they will never be able to buy, borrow, or take. I know exactly who I am, and now, so does everyone else. She came back with nothing but memory and walked out with everything. If this story hit you somewhere real, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your sign. More stories like this. Every week, Dote Over, Part 5 is The Reckoning. And it is going to be devastating.